Nepal is an Asian country between the borders of India and China in the Himalayan mountains. It has approximately 30 million people. And in less than a work week, in less than 5 days, we are told that a bunch of Gen Z kids just all suddenly woke up upset about the same thing on the same day, and they all decided to go out to the same places and burn everything down and run the government of a country of 30 million people out of power, again, in less than a work week. This is what we're being told. And people are asking me, was the United States behind this? And I concluded, yes, it was, because I've done extensive research. I'm going to share that research with you, all of the evidence, all the different components of the protests, and who was behind all of them. But the first thing I want to address are people that criticize me. Every time I say the US is organizing unrest in a targeted country, I always get people that say, Brian, you're denying these people agency. They have grievances. They're really angry. They told me they're angry. And you're saying that they can't organize themselves? I'm not saying they can't organize themselves. I'm saying that no matter what a protest is about, and no matter who is behind it or what is behind it, you still require a number of things, including leadership, resources, logistics, communication, coordination, preparation. You need to have all of these things to successfully overthrow a government of a nation. Governments already, just by the nature of being a government, are capable of coordinating across a wide spectrum of activities, from security to just maintaining the country and its infrastructure, reacting to disasters, healthcare crises. They have the ability to coordinate. So a protest movement that's able to out-coordinate and overwhelm them requires at least as much or more backing and coordination and preparation for the protests. A bunch of people don't just wake up on the same day, spontaneously organize themselves in less than 5 days and successfully overthrow a government. It doesn't happen. It is a fantasy. It is a bad Hollywood. It's not even just a Hollywood movie plot. It is a lazy and ridiculous Hollywood movie plot. And people will say, Brian, you're denying these people their agency. These people can organize protests in their own country. I agree, they can. I've seen it happen, and I've reported on it. There were protests in Thailand recently, and people were asking me, is the United States government behind those protests? And I said, no, they're not. I know who's behind them. I know who funds them. I know who's leading them. I know who's organizing it all and running the logistics, and they are not connected to the US government. They are opposed to it. In 2014, there were major protests in Thailand that looked very much like a US-sponsored color revolution, but at the time I was reporting that no, they're not. And I even compared them to the protests in Ukraine, which were also taking place at the time, and I showed how different the Western media's coverage of these two superficially similar protests. I showed how the Western media had two completely different takes on them. They very enthusiastically supported the protests in Ukraine. They ignored all of the violence carried out by the protesters. They focused and exaggerated all of the violence the police and the military responded with. And they were calling these protesters freedom fighters and pro-democracy. And they said the protesters in Thailand, these were undemocratic rabble. And the US government wrote a letter expressing concern over the quote-unquote undemocratic protests, and the Washington Post wrote an op-ed, The Post's View. Okay, this was 2014. Thailand's anti-democracy protests should provoke a harsh rebuke from the US. So they weren't just opposed to the protests, they were saying the US should take active measures against these protests in another country on the other side of the planet. And so they're talking about popular demonstrations against democracy. That's what they were calling it, because at the time, a US-backed client regime was in power in Thailand. These protests were trying to remove it. Now, I saw these protests. I observed them. I experienced them. I lived through them. And I can tell you that it wasn't just ordinary Thai people spontaneously organizing against the US-backed government. There were political parties, institutions, business interests, student groups. All of these groups got together, pooled their resources, coordinated. There was There was a leadership structure with a definite hierarchy. There was logistical support. And even though the Thai military won't admit it, they were almost certainly involved in all of this. They prepared extensively for it, and then they executed these, and it was a very protracted protest that eventually did lead to the ousting of the US-backed client regime. So I am not saying that that is not possible. What I am saying is, realistically, no matter what the protest is about, who is behind it, it still requires all of these components to be successful. It is just a matter of human nature and the physical realities of organizing large groups of people and getting them to do specific things required to overthrow an entire government. Let's get back to Nepal specifically. I hope I've dispelled that. I'm not saying that people cannot organize inside their own country large-scale protests. They can, but they still require leadership and funding. You can identify it, and you can rule out with confidence that it was not the US. You could see that not only was the US not connected to anyone involved in the protests in Thailand in 2014, the US openly opposed it and actively sought to counter it. Now, what about Nepal? What do we know about these protests in Nepal? We are being told by the BBC, this was from 4 days ago, what we know about Nepal's anti-corruption protests as PM resigns. And so we have youth-led anti-corruption protesters. Youth-led anti-corruption protesters. I just want to show people this. And I just wonder, the people who are acting confused or denying US involvement, did they even check the US National Endowment for Democracy's website? It is still up. This is their most recent disclosure. I've explained that they no longer disclose the name of organizations, but they still describe the programs they are funding. This is for Asia. You use Control F, you type in Nepal, you hit enter, and it brings you down to the programs that they are funding in Nepal. This is a series of programs they have already been funding in Nepal, spanning several years. Empowering youth, countering corruption. This is what they were funding in Nepal. And then a youth-led movement countering corruption erupts and overthrows the government in less than 5 days. And people are saying, did the NED fund this? I don't think that they did. I think the kids just did this on their own. This is what grown adults are saying right now. But it is this obvious and this blatant. That is what they did. They funded youth groups to counter corruption, and then a youth-led protest countering corruption erupted and overthrew the government in Nepal. Now, that is not the only evidence that I have. I will go through all of the different components of any of these color revolutions, the different components. There's always different components. There's the core leadership. There's the group that is organizing. It could be one organization. It could be a group of organizations. You have your fake human rights organizations that are going to sit there and create a pretext for the protests, and then they will also selectively report on the violence taking place during it. They will ignore all of the violence of the protesters, and they will exaggerate all of the violence from the police and military reacting to that violence, and the Western media will verbatim repeat that to international audiences. You have legal organizations that receive US government money to provide unlimited legal assistance to the agitators, the leadership of the protests, and people caught up in the protests. And this is to create a sense of impunity for the protesters. And you have media organizations that are attempting to amplify and spread, first of all, the motivation to get people out into the streets and to help escalate the protests as quickly and as widely as possible. So you have all of these components. I'm going to talk about absolutely all of them. And I started by showing you the general programs the NED is funding in Nepal, which are literally the demographics and focus of the protests that erupted. Okay, and there's others there also. There's strengthening government accountability and democratic processes through investigative journalism. There's also protecting Dalit rights. So they're always working inside of a country to pick ethnic or religious minorities and create tension between them and others. This is what the British Empire did when it colonized India, Nepal, Bangladesh, all of these countries in the subcontinent and into the Himalayas. And the British role in Nepal is going to come up here very quickly. So now let's go to the New York Times. The New York Times, I'm going to read a little bit from the New York Times. Nepal's social media ban backfires as political moves to a chat room. The parliament of Nepal right now is Discord. A user said of the platform popular with video gamers where tens of thousands are debating the nation's future. And so what we're expected to believe is that a bunch of kids spontaneously organized and overthrew their country, and now somehow they know how to use all of these online tools to organize a de facto interim government. That's what we're expected to believe, that they've done all of this on their own. It doesn't require any specialized knowledge or training. They just somehow, they know how to do this. I'm going to show you the specific US government programs that have spent millions of dollars spanning many years to train the opposition groups they are backing to do exactly this. So there is a precedent and there's evidence of US involvement in Nepal. So what does the New York Times say? It says, an attempt to ban social media in Nepal ended this week in violent protests with the prime minister ousted, the parliament in flames, and soldiers on the streets of the capital. Now the very technology the government tried to outlaw. And why were they trying to outlaw it? Because they realized the US was using it to divide and destroy and usurp their country. Is being harnessed to help select the country's next leader, as more than 100,000 citizens are meeting regularly in virtual chat rooms to debate the country's future. You tell me what percentage of 30 million people is 100,000, and if this is a legitimate process in any shape, form, or way. I would tell you it is not. Okay, I will tell you. It's less than 1%. It's less than half of 1%. Right here. What percent of 30 million is 100,000? 0.3 repeating percent. So usually we complain about the 1%, and now the 0.3% is running Nepal. Think about it. More than 30 people were killed in clashes with the police during youth-led protests that convulsed the capital. Outrage over wealth inequality, corruption, and plans to ban some social media platforms. Again, I will get into that. Social media platforms based in the US, repeatedly used, having documented evidence that they've worked with the US State Department to create youth-led mobs like this in other countries to overthrow governments. This was what the whole Arab Spring was. This is what was going on in Serbia in 2000. This is what happened in Ukraine in 2014. There is a single template, and they have reused it everywhere. Now they have used this identical template in Nepal. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that this template used in Nepal looks exactly like all of these others. I will get into the details of that. So Nepalis have taken to Discord, a platform popularized by video gamers, to enact the digital version of a national convention, as if these people know how to do that intuitively. And that whether they did or not, that process has any legitimacy at all. The channel's organizers are members of Hami Nepal. Who's Hami Nepal? We'll talk about Hami Nepal here in a moment. A civic organization. An organization means you have an office, you have staff, you have expenses, you require funding. Who's providing them that funding? And many of those participating in the chat are the so-called Gen Z activists who led this week's protests. So there's a core organization that organized and led the protests, and now they are overseeing the transition from the government they ousted to whatever it is they're installing into place. There's two takeaways here. All right, so again, they're claiming a bunch of kids, unemployed, angry kids, somehow know how to create a government on Discord. That is absurd. Okay, that's number one. Second, Hami Nepal, this is the organization they are admitting led the protests and are now organizing this transition online, using these online tools. And they did all of this in just less than a work week, less than 5 days. And so I will get into Hami Nepal in just a moment, but I want to talk about they're talking about this ban on social media. And I want to show you who created the initial backlash, who created the buzz, who was promoting this online, who was absolutely against it, and who was funding them to do that. So we'll start with CPJ, Committee to Protect Journalists. CPJ, a Western organization funded by Western governments and Western corporate foundations, is saying to Nepal how to run their internal political affairs. And they're saying, CPJ, Nepal lawmakers should reject social media bill threatening press freedom. Look at the date here, February 14th, 2025. So this already goes beyond just 5 days, okay? You're being told this ridiculous Hollywood narrative to sell this to you. This goes all the way back months, maybe even longer. This CPJ statement telling Nepal on the other side of the planet how to run its internal political affairs, how to manage its information space, says the Nepalese government should withdraw a recently introduced social media bill that is expected to undermine press freedom, the Committee to Protect Journalists said. Nepal's proposed social media law is ripe for misuse against journalists reporting on critical topics of public interest. Wait until you see who funds CPJ. And the media, they're worried about being regulated, and obviously why. So this was the CPJ Asia Program Coordinator. Nepalese lawmakers should refuse to accept the proposed legislation unless it is significantly revised to protect the rights of freedom and expression and privacy. And what they mean, protect Western propagandists and people in Nepal taking Western money to spread Western propaganda. They need to be protected. They cannot be targeted and dealt with under this law. This is what they are saying. So who is funding CPJ? Very easy to search any of this. CPJ's own website posts their annual reports. The most recent one I can find is 2023. The funding is the same over and over and over again. You use Control F. You see there's a huge number of organizations here, right? Let me show you what to do with this for lazy people that couldn't be bothered to do any research about what was going on in Nepal. You highlight all of these names, okay? You go to even a mainstream pro-Western AI tool like Gemini of Google, and you ask it, please organize. I'm always nice to AI, so when they take over the world, they'll spare me. Please organize this list into corporations, media interests, and foundations. Okay, because that list, I mean, it's tiny, it's difficult to read, and you'd have to sit there all day looking at every single name. All right, and then you hit submit. And what it's going to do for me is organize this. And the list is very easy to now see. You have AT&T, Citi you know, these are all massive mainstream US, European corporations, banks, Forbes, JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch and Company. Here is Meta, Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, and the list goes on and on. That's how you sort it out. But I already asked it earlier, and I will show you some of the key results. So I just went over some of them. It's funded by Open Society, which we know works adjacent to the National Endowment for Democracy, and the Ford Foundation, which for decades has been a source of laundering US government funds to all of these examples of interference around the globe. Major US media corporations like News Corporation, Fox News, Newsweek, New York Times, Washington Post, NBC, ABC, CNN, they're all on there. And they're worried that if nations start taking over their own information space and preventing the West from controlling the narrative inside their information space, they will lose control globally. And we have to remember America's overarching geopolitical objective, under which everything else falls, is ensuring no rivals develop. This has been since the end of World War II. It continues to this very day. Corporate-funded think tanks and official government papers explaining the official position of the US government all say the US government is the sole global superpower and it needs to maintain that position. Who else is funding CPJ? Google, Meta, Microsoft. Google and Meta specifically would lose influence and impunity inside Nepal's information space if this bill was passed. And if they were forced to register, they didn't want to register and comply, and then they would be banned. So there's an obvious conflict of interest with CPJ, its funding, and it demanding what Nepal does or doesn't do inside its own country regarding its information space. Goldman Sachs is funding them. Okay, these are not good guys. These are all of the corporate financier interests funding all of the think tanks, driving all of America's foreign and domestic policies that we all agree are destroying America domestically and ravaging the world globally. We all admit that. And so that's who's behind CPJ. It is a front. It is not a genuine advocate of journalistic freedom or human rights or anything else. It is a front that hides behind these values to advance US foreign policy objectives, including in Nepal. There's more. That's CPJ. That's them complaining about another country on the other side of the planet that's none of their business. Here is the Kathmandu Post. So this is Nepal. This is media inside Nepal. FNJ, other groups object to government's decision to ban social media platforms. So that was CPJ complaining back in February. Don't pass the law, don't ban. Well, now Nepal's government is banning the social media platforms. Here's all the people complaining. An umbrella body and other 22 groups warn that a ban violates rights guaranteed by the Constitution. And they're basically just repeating what the CPJ said. Why are they repeating it? Because this is a universal truth they're both fighting for, or because they're all funded by the exact same interests. Other organizations that they list. So issuing a joint statement. So they're talking about FNJ, Federation of Nepali Journalists. They're also talking about Digital Freedom, Coalition Freedom Forum, Nepal, Internet Society, Nepal Chapter, Accountability Lab, Nepal, and ChildSafeNet. What if I told you that almost every single one of those is funded by US government money? It is, and I'll show you. So here, go to the Federation of Nepali Journalists, About, and you scroll down, and they say they're members of IFEX. I mean, it itself admits that it itself is funded by Open Society and all of these corporations and foundations. It also says, Open Society Institute dominates the list of funders for IFEX members, of which that federation is a member. 5 years ago and now, the National Endowment for Democracy figuring prominently also. So Open Society, National Endowment for Democracy. This is a network they fund and they direct to take advantage of and hide behind values like journalistic freedom, free speech, human rights. They're hiding behind this to advance US foreign policy objectives around the world, including in Nepal. And the Federation of Nepali Journalists itself, they have all of these financial disclosures. They're extremely long and complicated and difficult to read. This one is 19 pages long. Right here, National Democratic Institute, NDI. This is a subsidiary of the National Endowment for Democracy. The NED funds NDI, and then NDI funds the Federation of Nepali Journalists. They are taking US government money. They are funded by US government money. Right there. All of these links will be in the video description below. You can look at them yourself. The evidence is actually much more extensive. This is what I have time to show you. We're building a growing list now of verified US government-funded fronts involved in setting the stage for these protests in Nepal, not local independent media funded by and for the people actually living in Nepal. Here is Freedom Forum. Freedom Forum was on that list in Kathmandu Post article complaining about the government's social media law. Who funds them? Their partners. The Enabling State Program, the UK Department of International Development, so the British government. They also list the British Embassy by name. Okay, so that's another one. The list is getting longer. What about Accountability Lab, Nepal? It is a branch of Accountability Lab itself. It is based in Washington, D.C. We have this higher government disclosure right here. Headquarters, the Accountability Lab. This is their website. This is their headquarters, Washington, D.C., United States. Who's funding them? The Department of State. One after the other, after the other. They even have specific embassies, funding programs, and these are current. This isn't from 10, 20 years ago. This is current. And then we have ChildSafeNet. They have a whole website, a whole webpage regarding their partners. And it's this collection of US, European funded fronts, funded by the same handful of Open Society, National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, UK Aid, Meta. They're all on there. So all of these organizations mentioned by Kathmandu Post, opposed to the government's social media bill and then the social media ban for companies that refuse to register and follow the laws of Nepal, they're all funded by the US government, by European governments, and by Western foundations, the same ones that we know for a fact organize regime change all around the globe. I will get into admissions from the Western media regarding that. Let's go to Hami Nepal, the organization, the BBC, the New York Times, everyone admits organized the protests and is now organizing the political transition in Nepal. You go to their website, a youth movement, and they've got the clenched fist, and this should be a warning. This should spur you to look deeper. This is all of the ideas, concepts, imagery the US has been using for decades now to target and overthrow governments all around the world. That is not a coincidence. That's in English. It's got the clenched up fist from Serbia 2000 that they've recycled a million times since then. A youth movement, more than just an organization. All of these very nice sounding but completely meaningless slogans. You go down, this is their about page. I will, again, link it in the story. Championing the greater good and fighting for what's right. And they have 3 paragraphs of just absolute word salad. And all you get by reading it is that they get money from somewhere and then they use it to do good things. That's what it says on their website. And then you scroll down and they have brands that support us. And if you hover over them, you can see that they'll link off to some company or organization. Okay, and some of them are like hotels. Some of them are, this one, the Barbara Foundation. They allowed Hami Nepal to use their offices as a headquarters for some period of time. Coca-Cola is a US-based corporation, and Coca-Cola funds a lot of the think tanks that are producing policy papers promoting war and regime change all around the globe. Now, I'm not saying Coca-Cola is funding or partnering Hami Nepal to carry out regime change in Nepal. I'm just saying this is an organization that claims that it stands for the best interests of people in Nepal. Everyone wants to say it's organic, independent, but it is connected to Western corporations involved in whatever capacity involved in war and regime change around the globe. They also have chambers. Ireland, this is the Chamber of Commerce in Ireland. And if you go to their website, some of these are major and extremely corrupt Western corporations. Banks, contractors. Lilly is part of the US European big pharma conglomeration. So that's one of their partners. They don't explain how they're associated with any of these groups. Have Viber, which the Western media says they were using to coordinate their protests. But a lot of this could just be some sort of innocent affiliation. Al Jazeera, maybe Al Jazeera featured them in an article. That's why they put them on their website. But what is Al Jazeera? Al Jazeera is basically Arab BBC. It is Qatari state-funded media, and it has supported every US foreign policy objective around the globe without exception, except for the issue regarding Israel and Palestine. But that is how they maintain credibility in the region around the world. That is what gets people to watch Al Jazeera. And then they slip in all the other color revolution justifications for war, smearing and attacking nations opposed to Western primacy around the globe. That is Al Jazeera, Qatari state media, hosting one of the largest US military bases in the region. And they just allowed Israel to kill a bunch of Hamas, not even militants or military commanders, but negotiators. And then they have, I'll get to this one in a moment. They have the Gurkha Welfare Trust. Gurkha Welfare Trust, what is that? Let me explain to you something about Nepal and British colonialism. They went into the whole subcontinent, they took everything over, they took all the different ethnic and religious groups and pitted them against each other, got everybody killing each other, and then they took advantage of all of these different groups and their different characteristics, and they exploited them to help build the British Empire. They took Gurkhas, who are a legendary group of warriors throughout history, and they incorporated them into their own units in the British Imperial Army. The British military today still recruits Gurkhas. Western military contractors still go to Nepal and recruit Gurkhas. If you go to their website, Partners and Affiliations, they don't just say who they're partnered with or affiliated with. They also explain the nature of the affiliation. So the British Ministry of Defense, the British Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, they have offices and facilities in Nepal. And this is basically the retirement program for these people they exploit to build Western empire around the globe today, still to this day, today. And then when they're done with them, they send them back to Nepal. That's another organization connected directly to the British government, the Foreign Office, and the military. And now we go to this one. Students for Free Tibet. You can see it down here in the corner. It pops up, the URL. Students for a Free Tibet. Free Tibet, Dalai Lama. Anyone who knows anything about Tibet and the Dalai Lama, they realize this is a CIA project going all the way back to the end of World War II. I'm going to show you evidence of that from the State Department itself. Students for a Free Tibet works in solidarity with the Tibetan people in their struggle for freedom and independence. So it's not like we support Tibetan people inside of China. No, they're saying Tibetan independence. This is a separatist organization. It's not based in Tibet. It's not even based in Nepal next to Tibet, although they do have activities in Nepal. It is based in the United States, in New York City. The NED's website, this is now deleted off of their website, but you can still access it through archived versions of the web page, Tibet 2019. And if you scroll down, you're going to find not one, but at least 2 grants for students for a free Tibet. Students for a free Tibet, twice. They're mentioned twice in this disclosure. You can see there's a lot. There's a lot of programs here listed. So Hami Nepal is partners with a US government-funded separatist organization, anti-China separatist organization. It is anti-China. It also advocates for a free Tibet. It's in the name, Free Tibet. This should raise a flag. When you see this, it should immediately raise a flag. You don't accidentally, casually, coincidentally find yourself connected to any defunded organizations. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen by accident. Hami Nepal is admitting these are its affiliations, a British government and military connected trust to manage the mercenaries they recruited from Nepal. Western corporations, Coca-Cola, pharmaceutical, oil, banking, and a US funded anti-China separatist movement. It all raises serious concerns. This Free Tibet movement, we have to remember what this is and the implications of being connected to it in any shape, form, or way, associating with these people in any shape, form, or way is very serious, because this is part of a long-standing US foreign policy objective to not just advocate for Tibet independence, but to do it violently, to do it through sedition, treason, terrorism, and military force. And we have this from the Office of the Historian, from the State Department's official website, status report on Tibetan operations. This goes all the way back to it goes back even further than 1968. I mean, they even tell you 1951, 1956. And they're talking about political action, propaganda, paramilitary and intelligence operations. This is what the US government was doing then, and this is what they're still doing right now. You're a youth movement, and you're connected to all of these, it's just a coincidence that you're connected to all of these Western corporations and also a front funded by the US specifically to carve territory off of neighboring China, neighboring Tibet, inside of China. This is just what Hami Nepal is admitting to. We have to remember that there is no transparency here. There never has been. All the way back to 2000, when the US used this exact same template to overthrow the government in Serbia, it was all about funding it quietly, meeting and directing meeting with and directing these organizations quietly, secretly, often outside of the targeted country. We know this because the people involved in it admitted it. This is a New York Times article from 2000 who really brought down Milosevic. And I'm going to read to you from it, and I'm going to show you the template, and you can see how the movement in Nepal fits into it exactly. And there's no other explanation to how this protest was organized, funded, resourced, except as yet another US engineered color revolution. So it says, for those Americans intent on bringing democracy to Serbia, the student movement offered several attractions. So talking about student, youth-led movements. Its flat organization would frustrate the regime's attempts to pick a target to hit or compromise. In other words, it's very hard to figure out who's leading it. This is the whole point of using youth, student-led movements. It's very hard to figure out who is in charge. By flat, they're talking about it's flat, it's decentralized. This is by design. This isn't a coincidence. It is by design. And so McCarthy says from August 1999, the dollar started to flow to Optar pretty significantly. Of the almost 3 million spent by his group in Serbia, he's talking about the National Endowment for Democracy. Since September 1998, he says Optar was certainly the largest recipient. And of course, they're funding all of these other groups, and none of them are disclosing it. So the only way you would know is by understanding what the template looks like and identifying the groups within that template. That is how you spot a color revolution. They will make mistakes. You will see it, like Hami Nepal listing an NED-funded separatist organization based in the US, funded by the US government on its website as a partner. That is a mistake, a slip-up. That's how you know they were one of the organizations involved. They did not do this on their own. The money went into Optar accounts outside of Serbia. So again, they're taking specific measures to conceal their involvement in the color revolution. They are engineering and funding. At the same time, McCarthy, again, from the National Endowment for Democracy, held a series of meetings with the movement's leaders. And then they list a number of cities outside of Serbia where he met them. Okay, so it's not, we're just funding them. It's just a coincidence we're on the same page. No, you're meeting with them, you're training them, you're directing them, you're equipping them. You're running this organization. You're just making it look like a youth organization. It is a US engineered color revolution. That is how it works. The Optar leader would also meet with William D. Montgomery, the former American ambassador to Croatia, in the American embassy in Budapest. So again, secret meetings outside of Serbia. This is how they organize it. They organize it well in advance. People want to believe that a bunch of kids can just do this in less than 5 days. This required preparation. They're explaining to you how this all works. Now back to Nepal. If Hami Nepal admits it is connected to US corporations, European corporations, banks, pharmaceutical companies, and they're also somehow connected to a US NED-funded anti-China separatist organization, that's just what they're admitting to. It almost certainly has connections that it's not admitting to. Again, no matter what protest is taking place, it requires leadership and resources. So when you have to figure out who are these groups connected to? Where are they most likely getting their money? It's obvious Hami Nepal is most obviously getting its money from the US. All of the organizations that set the stage for the protest, we can verify and show the US government funding. And then Hami Nepal just coincidentally has an admitted connection to the National Endowment for Democracy and almost certainly other much deeper connections with greater implications. Okay, so there's these protests, they're citing corruption. We're angry about corruption. We're angry about the social media platforms being shut down. You can already see the conflict of interest with CPJ being funded by US-based social media platforms. And we understand how the US uses these social media platforms literally to overthrow targeted governments, because that's what they did during the Arab Spring. Do you remember this article from the New York Times? 2011, US groups helped nurture Arab uprising. And I remember having the same argument with people back then. Everyone was telling me it was spontaneous, it's youth organized. Brian, you're denying human agency. But I knew the name of the organizations that were leading them, and I had documented evidence of their connections to the National Endowment for Democracy. They were on lists of participants at workshops the State Department was organizing years in advance to equip, train, and prepare them to go back and overthrow their respective countries. And the New York Times article admits all of that evidence that I also dug up on my own and was showing people. A number of groups and individuals directly involved in the revolts and reforms sweeping the region, okay, and again, revolts and reforms, all connected to ambiguous claims of corruption, received training and financing, not just financing, training and financing, because to carry out a successful protest, you need both. And if you're not accounting to how Hami Nepal and all of these youths got funding and training, if you can't account for that, then you don't know anything at all about the protest itself. They got it from groups like the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, NDI, which I just showed you was behind the Federation of Nepali Journalists, complaining about the social media ban, and Freedom House, a nonprofit human rights organization based in Washington, according to interviews in recent weeks and American diplomatic cables obtained by WikiLeaks. The work of these groups often provoked tensions between the United States and many Middle Eastern leaders who frequently complained that their leadership was being undermined, according to the cables. The Republican and Democratic institutes are loosely affiliated with the Republican Democratic parties. They were created by Congress and are financed through the National Endowment for Democracy. So the NDI is funded by the NED, which was set up in 1983 to channel grants for promoting democracy in developing nations, overthrowing governments, and installing obedient client regimes. The National Endowment for Democracy receives about $100 million annually from Congress. Freedom House also gets the bulk of its money from the American government, mainly from the State Department. And the NED's website is still up. They're still being funded, and they are still funding sedition all around the world, including in Nepal, funding youth groups who we will not name. We have to guess which ones they are. Hami Nepal, obviously, to counter corruption. The whole basis, the whole protest was based on. Very obvious. It's so obvious. And there's no other way to account for how this happened. We didn't fund them to start protests, but we did help support their development of skills and networking, said Stephen McInnery, executive director of the Project on Middle East Democracy, a Washington-based advocacy and research group. The training did play a role in what ultimately happened, but it was their revolution. We didn't start it. And that's just what they're saying. We know now that the NED contacts these organizations directly and coordinates with them. Every step they take, they're talking sometimes to the very head of the NED, coordinating all of this. We know that because there are leaked videos now exposing this process. So this is just someone talking to the New York Times. The US has been implicated in funding this. They still want to pretend that somehow it was all done by them. We just helped a little teeny weeny little bit. Some Egyptian youth leaders attended a 2008 technology meeting in New York, where they were taught to use social networking and mobile technologies to promote democracy. Among those sponsoring the meeting were Facebook, Google, MTV, Columbia Law School, and the State Department. And I have shown this document many times before. This was the one in 2008. They had these every single year. So it wasn't just one meeting. They had these every single year, and they were training armies of agitators from all around the world to go back home and overthrow their respective governments. Alliance of Youth Movements. And if you just type in State Department, right here, comes up 8 times. All of these people affiliated with the State Department. You have Facebook. All of these people involved from Facebook. And we remember how the Western media at the time said, all of these kids, they all just organized on their own using social media. It's a social media revolution. How great. It's so great that they were all able to rise up against their corrupt governments and overthrow them all on their own using Facebook, when in reality, and here's the evidence, it's right in front of you, and this is going to be in the video description below. You can read through it. It's worse than I'm making it sound. It is 26 pages admitting that this is what they did. They extensively trained and equipped and funded them to overthrow their countries using social media and other internet tools. And that is exactly what they did in Nepal. People are not capable in less than 5 days of discovering these tools, learning how to effectively use them, and then coordinating a mass movement that can overwhelm an already organized and well-funded government. It is impossible. It is ridiculous. Then they have Yemeni youth activists because they overthrew the government in Yemen as well. And that is the whole impetus that triggered the whole conflict that has since destroyed Yemen, as well as Libya and Syria and many other countries in the region. It helped me very much. He's talking about US State Department, Facebook training, Google training. I used to think that change only takes place by force and by weapons, she said. Well, you can also create change in your country. I'm not saying whether it will be good or bad. You could also create change by becoming a tool for the US government and helping overthrow your government, destabilize and destroy your country. There will be definitely change, and we can see how that change manifested itself in Yemen, even to this very day. And that is exactly what they did in Hong Kong. That is what they've done here in Thailand in 2009, 2010, and then again from 2019 to 2020. And as I have told you, in 2014, Thai people themselves, Thai interests, institutions, political leaders organized themselves and pooled resources and funding and extensive preparation to push back against this. This is how it actually works. There is no example of a bunch of kids just spontaneously organizing on their own using these type of tools. I'm going to get into the kind of tools that were used in Nepal and also in Indonesia. And I showed you in a other video all of the evidence that the US is involved in Indonesia. All of the organizations promoting the protests, leading the protests, they were all funded by the US NED. I showed you the evidence where they themselves admitted they cannot do their work without US government money. There is this video from the BBC about the Oslo Freedom Forum, also funded by the US government through the State Department. This is what they're admitting that they're doing.
Name badge.
There is your name tag. Thank you so much.
Program of events.
So this is all the information for the week.
The revolution will be organised. The aristocracy of activists gathered in Oslo to tell their stories, share ideas and learn. They're already actors in their own countries, together today on a different platform. In the basement of this 4-star hotel, human rights activists come to what feels a bit like a school for revolution. This workshop, how to make sure your message, whether in Egypt, Ukraine, Hong Kong, China, North Korea, catches on.
This may not evoke the spirit of the barricades, but the teaching here is to be successful, to topple a government for good, you have to be organised and to plan meticulously. And activists here have been involved in helping to organise the current protests in Hong Kong. Their plan to put thousands of people on the streets of the territory was in fact hatched nearly 2 years ago.
We've been told many of Hong Kong's demonstrators were trained long before taking to the streets to use non-violent action, as they describe it, as a weapon of mass destruction.
Protesters were taught how to behave during a protest, so how to keep ranks, how to speak to police, how to manage their own movement, how to use marshals within their movement. So these are people who are specially trained. There's also, how to behave when arrested. Practical things like the need for food and water. That movement can last longer when people are taken care of, and also how to manage a water cannon being used against you, and other types of police violence.
It's meticulous.
Absolutely.
And it's those lessons that are shared here. The chemistry of troublemakers who are agitating for positive change. But of course, struggles don't always succeed.
The problem with this is that the risk is high and that you can lose numbers fast.
Sergej Popovic was a leader in the overthrow of Milosevic. Since teaching activists from 40 countries, but only in 6 or 7 have his techniques of non-violent protest changed things for good. Techniques he believes more vital every day.
And the reason she's admitting that this exists, and the reason these things actually do exist, is because this is the only way for a protest to start in the first place and have any chance of succeeding. They do not spontaneously organize themselves, just like hospitals don't spontaneously build themselves in our communities, no matter how badly we want or need them, and no matter how nice that would be, they don't spontaneously materialize, nor does a well-organized, concerted effort to successfully, mind you, overthrow a government. All right, now let's get into these stories about how the protests in Nepal organized themselves, what tools they used, and then I will show you the US government programs that spent years training them and many people else around the world how to do this. And they have to train them because there's no way for people to just spontaneously not only know about this technology, know how to use it, and also use it effectively. This is just like the Ukrainian military with trained soldiers gets new military equipment from the West that they have never used before. And even though they're trained soldiers and they have experience fighting in real warfare, they're incapable of using these weapons because it takes time and experience to learn how to do it effectively. So no, there's kids are not just downloading BitChat, I'll tell you what that is in just a moment, and then using it to circumvent the Nepalese government shutting the internet down, shutting these platforms down, and then they use these applications not just to circumvent efforts to stop the protests, but to still carry out the protests successfully. So we have this article from AFP. It is published on Gulf News, but it says right here, AFP, from Discord to BitChat, how online outrage shook Nepal's government. Again, social media bans, corruption, anger, and Nippo kids memes ignite country's uprising. This was all done in the exact same manner the Arab Spring admittedly was done, which involved training well ahead of time, funding, and organizing by the US government, and then passing it off as some sort of spontaneous organic youth movement. And again, they're using the youth just like they did in Serbia because it's very hard to identify leaders and assign attribution. Nepal's crackdown on social media companies, which led to protests and police killing at least 19 people. Again, there was killing on both sides. And then when the Western media is pretending like only the police were killing anybody, that's how, again, that is another clue that the US and Europe are backing and promoting this protest. The lopsided, deliberate dishonesty is part of a years-long decline in internet freedom around the world as even democracies seek to curtail online speech. And we remember back in February, the US government and foundation-funded fronts like CPJ complaining that Nepal shouldn't try to gain greater control over its information space that at the time was currently controlled by US-based social media platforms. That we know for a fact because they're listed together with the State Department, were involved in conspiring against the governments of other nations around the globe. The Himalayan country's government said last week it was blocking several social media platforms, including Facebook, X, YouTube, because the companies failed to comply with a requirement that they register with the government. The ban was lifted a day after the deadly protests. What's happening in Nepal mirrors this broader pattern of controlling the narrative and controlling of stories emerging from the ground. This is what an associate professor of information science at Cornell University said. This has happened several times in neighboring countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the protests in Bangladesh, I have confirmed without a shadow of a doubt that was also US engineered. I showed you the university programs funded by the US government that produced the people leading the protests. What else does the article talk about, and who do they interview about this topic? Not just Nepal, like neighboring countries. Nepal's government have been asking the companies to appoint a liaison in the country. So they don't want foreign social media platforms we know work with the US government to destabilize and overthrow governments to have control over Nepal's information space. It's very reasonable, but again, the Western media is making it sound unreasonable because there is a concerted effort to push this agenda and to overthrow governments and punish governments for trying to control their own information space. Because if they do start doing this successfully, the US will lose one of its greatest, most powerful superweapons, its ability to politically capture a country, control its information space, and shape the population to pursue interests for Washington at their own expense, like they're doing in Ukraine right now. But the move has been criticized as a tool for censorship and punishing opponents who voice their protests online, US government-funded opponents. Governments absolutely have a valid interest in seeking to regulate social media platforms. This is such a daily part of our lives and in our business, and it's certainly reasonable for authorities to sit down and say, we want to develop rules for the road. who said this, a senior researcher analyst for technology and democracy at the Washington-based nonprofit Freedom House, which is a part of the National Endowment for Democracy. It was created by, overseen, and funded by the U.S. government. So it's not some nonprofit NGO. It is an extension of U.S. foreign policy. From sparking protests that toppled the prime minister to giving young people a platform to discuss their country's political future, social media was key to Nepal's extraordinary uprising this week. This is a copy and paste repeat of the narrative the U.S. media used to describe and sell the myth of the Arab Spring. I showed you documents years before the Arab Spring began. The people leading the protests in the Arab world were with the State Department and Google and Facebook, learning how to do all of that, being enabled to do all of that. Fueled in part by anger over flashy lifestyles flaunted by elites, young anti-corruption demonstrators, mainly in their 20s, rallied on Monday. The loose grouping, largely viewed as members of Gen Z, flooded the capital, Kathmandu, to demand an end to a ban on Facebook, YouTube, and other popular sites. Anger over flashy lifestyles flaunted by elites. So there were viral stories about these elites and they have so many nice things and you have nothing and you should be angry about that. Why was everyone in Nepal seeing these stories on these social media platforms? Who controls the algorithm and why? We know that Facebook, Twitter before it was X, and even X right now, they have algorithms that determine what you see and what you don't see. It's not determined by the kids in Nepal. It's not determined by the government in Nepal. It's determined by these US-based social media platforms and whatever arrangement or agreement they have with the State Department. And if you don't believe me, even the Western media has admitted this. This is a Washington Post article. This is about why Facebook won't let you control your own news feed. Testimony to US Congress and abroad. Whistleblower Francis Hugin has pointed to the algorithm as central to the social network's problems, arguing that it systematically amplifies and rewards hateful, divisive, misleading, and sometimes outright false content by putting it at the top of the users' feeds. We also, if you remember, there were experiments Facebook was doing on its users without their knowledge or consent, seeing how different types of content affected their mood. This continues, though. It crafts its own ranking system to keep users hooked, sometimes at the cost of angering or misinforming them. And if they can do this to make money, they can also do it in cooperation with the State Department to advance US foreign policy objectives. It is possible, it is known that they do it, and it is certainly possible deliberately creating anger and discontent in Nepal to trigger a US-backed and engineered color revolution. It was no coincidence that everyone suddenly got angry all at the same time because they made a concerted push through the algorithm to get everyone angry all at one time when they were ready to pull the trigger. They did the exact same thing during the Arab Spring. It was not a coincidence. Now back to this AFP article. The rallies ended in chaos and tragedy. So you make a bunch of people who have no idea what's going on or what they're doing. You emotionally charge them, make them angry. You send them out into the streets. You have organizations leading them out into the streets. And you want to overthrow the government. You know they're obviously not capable of doing this nonviolently, so you just unleash them. And you use a wave of chaos, and you just hope Nepal's government is incapable of stopping it, which they weren't. And that's why they collapsed. They tried the same thing in Indonesia, but the government was able to stabilize the country. They've done it here in Thailand. I've watched it happen, and the government was able to stop it. Sometimes they can't, and then the government collapses. Parliament was set ablaze. The prime minister resigned, and the army took charge of the streets. Now many activists are taking to US group chat app Discord to talk over their next steps. So all of these US-based platforms that we know for a fact work with the State Department to overthrow other countries, now they're using the same type of applications in Nepal. Again, not a coincidence. More than half of Nepal's 30 million people are online, according to the World Bank. Days before the protest, many had rushed to VPN services or virtual private networks to evade blocks on platforms. I can believe that people would rush to VPN and try to use them to circumvent a block. Would the majority of these people be able to do it successfully? Probably not, unless they were trained. Unless there was a core group that was trained ahead of time to use specific VPN services and other tools to circumvent government attempts to quell the protests online by shutting down the flow of information online. Fears of a wider internet shutdown also drove a surge in downloads for Bluetooth messaging app BitChat, created by tech billionaire Jack Dorsey. Jack Dorsey was at Twitter when Twitter was working with the State Department to overthrow governments all across the Arab world, in Ukraine, here in Thailand. Jack Dorsey's Twitter and also Facebook at the time kicked me off both of their platforms for exposing US-backed interference here in Thailand. I have their official newsroom report on it, removing coordinated inauthentic behavior in Thailand, Russia, Ukraine, and Honduras. My website before it was the New Atlas was called Land Destroyer, and I had different pages for different topics, and they were pretending like I was an army of people maliciously coordinating and cross-posting when I had a Facebook page for Thailand, I had one for geopolitics, wider geopolitics, I had one for local solutions, the local revolution, and they shut all of them down. And on the very exact same day, Twitter also deleted me. And let's go back to Facebook, now called Meta. We identified these accounts through an internal investigation in our suspected Thailand-linked coordinated inauthentic behavior. They're talking about one person, me. Our investigation benefited from information shared by local civil society organizations. Those are the Thai fronts funded by the National Endowment for Democracy who were denying their US government funding at the time. I had the documented evidence. I was showing it online and they shut me down for it. So if you, for even a second, believe that they weren't then or aren't now working together with the US government to help advance US foreign policy, even in the smallest ways, like I am a small fish, and they still went through all of this to silence me here in Thailand. If that's what you think, you're entitled to your opinion, but you are objectively wrong. The evidence is overwhelming. So they're talking about Jack Dorsey, who was involved in all of that I just showed you. Now he has BitChat, a Bluetooth messaging. So that means you have a phone, you cannot connect to the internet or the cell network because the government shut it down. So you connect your phone directly to everyone near you through Bluetooth, and then they have a protocol that allows you to send messages across this mesh of Bluetooth connected devices to whoever it is you're trying to reach. And that's what they were using. And I have used it before, and it requires a lot of practice and training to use it effectively. There's no way a bunch of kids just downloaded it and in less than 5 days were using it so expertly they were able to overthrow a well-organized government that had the means of communicating with one another. Just utterly absurd. Okay, so the whole thing started with young people posting on social media about corruption. Again, when something suddenly explodes, someone is behind it. They didn't just all spontaneously start finding themselves concerned about the lavish lifestyles of their leadership. This is literally what they did in Libya and in Syria and in Tunisia. All of these protests, they all had this element of, look how luxurious. This is the exact same template. That is not, again, it's not a coincidence. Do people remember Tunisia and Ben Ali, the leader, and how they selectively reported from WikiLeaks all of these claims of his lavish lifestyle and how that was all cited as the impetus that kicked off the so-called Arab Spring, which we now know for a fact was engineered years in advance by the US. And they simply used this narrative. They picked when they would push it, and then they made a concerted effort to have it go viral. And that is exactly what they did in Nepal. These things don't just spontaneously happen all on their own in this manner. Yes, things go viral, but it is enough to get people out into the streets to then self-organize and overthrow the government? No, it just doesn't work that way. So the same game we saw in the Arab Spring, reporting on the lavish lifestyles of these leaders, getting all these people wound up and then unleashing them to destroy their own countries. We see how every single country in the Arab Spring has since been destroyed. But that was by design. They were not, none of these groups had any chance at all of ever helping fix any of the problems in their country because they were foreign agents, whether they knew it or not. No matter how real the hatred was inside their hearts or minds, they were being used as tools by the US to advance US foreign policy objectives. So they had hashtags such as Nepo Kids, short for nepotism, compared the designer clothing and luxury holidays shown off in their Instagram posts to the difficulties faced by ordinary Nepalis. This is an issue for everyone in every country around the globe. So if this was a real thing, this would have happened in the US or in Europe. And all of these governments would be gone by now, because it's even worse in these other countries that the US protects the governments of, or is protecting itself within, but this just for whatever reason just never seems to happen. So they talk about designer clothing, luxury holidays shown off in their Instagram, the difficulties of ordinary Nepalis. One post, like 13,000 times, accused politicians, children of living like millionaires, asking, where is the tax money going? You're unemployed, you're not paying any tax money. They're all claiming they're unemployed youths. You're not paying taxes, so why are you worried about where tax money is going? And this whole thing over taxes is also endlessly repeated in these US-engineered protests. This was the one in 2019, 2020. This is from October 2020. New York Times. Bangkok is engulfed by protests. What's driving them? Rebellious youths, a history of coups, a royal family protected by laws that can punish critics. All the key ingredients in the struggle convulsing Thailand. And this is a protest where I identified every single core group and demonstrated irrefutable evidence of US government funding and the billionaires leading the political parties exploiting the violence and instability and using the protests to worm their way into power. They are demonstratively backed by the US government. Let me go find, because I remember all of these kids who don't even have jobs screaming about patsy goo, which is a rude way of saying my taxes, and then they were giving the three-finger salute that the CIA and NED created for the Milk Tea Alliance all across Southeast Asia and Hong Kong. And so it's the exact same thing. They just copied and pasted it from the Arab Spring to the protests in Thailand and Myanmar and Hong Kong, and now they just did it in Nepal. And you see the Western media promoting these ridiculous narratives, never telling you who's actually behind these protests. As if this was a real issue they just woke up all on their own and decided to care about. This is all I'm saying. Now back to the AFP article. Swiss-based company Proton VPN said Monday that signups from Nepal had shot up 6,000% in 3 days. Interest rose in Dorsey's BitChat platform, which works offline and describes itself as a way to resist censorship. I'm going to show you all of the US programs that funded applications specifically like this for the sole purpose of causing unrest and overthrowing a government, even if the government tries to shut down the internet. That is the whole purpose of this. And this is Jack Dorsey continuing now with BitChat what he had been doing with Twitter alongside Facebook and Google to help the US State Department overthrow entire regions of the planet going all the way back to 2011. There when you need it, wrote Dorsey on X, citing a post describing a sudden spike in BitChat downloads during the protests in Indonesia and Nepal. So the protests in Indonesia, we know for a fact, are being promoted by US government-funded organizations, because I showed you all of them, and they themselves admitting they get US government money. They were using BitChat there, and they were using it in Nepal. So does the US government fund programs to produce these tools, distribute them, and train people how to use them effectively so that when the trigger is pulled on a US engineered color revolution, it can happen in just 5 days? Yes, of course they are. We have this from the State Department. DRL Internet Freedom Program Portfolio Evaluation. Technology development. Technology Pillar's goal is to support the development of technologies that provide or enhance access to the internet by providing circumvention tools that bypass blocking filters and other censorship techniques used by authoritarian governments like BitChat, like VPN programs. Now, VPNs have been out there for a long time, and there are a lot of people that are familiar with that. That's more plausible. BitChat is completely implausible. That was specifically distributed amongst a core of the opposition. They were trained how to use it, and they employed it, and they helped others employ it. That is why they were able to use it so quickly. That is why US government is explaining to you right here that they have all of these programs, and they're spending millions of dollars every year developing, distributing, and training quote-unquote activists how to use these tools. We have this. NED Partner connects activists with critical digital tools in local languages. Nepal is there. Nepal is there. Here, they're right there between China and India. They're right there. They're listed by name right here. And what do? By training activists to use these localized tools, the organization also builds networks and provides opportunities for sharing best practices among volunteers, civic technology actors, and grassroots organizations working around the world. And grassroots, I mean, that sounds like, oh, they're grassroots, but the US government is backing them. So then how are they grassroots? Since its establishment in 2012, the Localization Lab has made over 70 open source tools available in 220 languages with the help of more than 7,000 volunteer translators that coordinate with local groups and developers worldwide. Okay, and then they admit all of the places that they have been doing this: Burma, Ukraine, Russia, all of these places. Some of these places have very good information space security, and the US is still trying to develop tools to circumvent those measures. And here, all of these will be, again, in the video description. You can go and check it out yourself. Here's a VPN, free VPN project. They've made it available in all of these places. Nepal, again, it's listed right here. It's on the list. They've specifically spent money and time developing it for Nepal. Here's the Open Technology Fund. It's funded by the US government via the US Agency for Global Media Funding. By the way, this website is still active. I have it opened right now, September 2025. President Trump did not defund it or dismantle it. It's still here. And this is one of the organizations developing these programs. Here's from the White House. This was under the Biden administration, defending against digital authoritarianism. Okay, in parallel to counter-authoritarian censorship on the internet, State Department will provide up to $4 million to establish and seed a multilateral surge and sustain fund for anti-censorship technology, which will enable the connection of more users to the uncensored internet, sustain those connections in times of greatest need, and invite like-minded partners to contribute jointly, like Jack Dorsey, formerly of Twitter, who has worked with the State Department to create and make available BitChat, used by the US-backed protesters in Indonesia and the US-backed protests in Nepal. And again, from the New York Times article regarding the Arab Spring, they specifically mentioned Facebook, Google, other Western media organizations together with the State Department. It was organized by the State Department. Hillary Clinton, at the time Secretary of State, would have a recorded Skype message that they would play in front of all of these activists from all of their different countries before sending them on their way back home to overthrow and destroy their own country.
Congratulate all of you who have come to Mexico City in person and online to be part of this groundbreaking summit. You are the vanguard of a rising generation of citizen activists who are using the latest technological tools to catalyze change, build movements, and transform lives. And I hope this conference provides an opportunity for you to learn from each other and discover the tools and techniques that will open new doors for activism and empowerment when you return home.
And all of those countries that the US destabilized have been destroyed. Destabilized or destroyed. Not one of them is better for it. So, the protests began based on algorithms promoting, having go viral these stories of corruption and lavish lifestyles, exactly as they did during the Arab Spring, admittedly, as they did during the Arab Spring. And also opposing the social media bill that the Nepalese government was passing, and then protesting against the social media ban. All of the organizations listed by the Kathmandu Post itself organizations based in Nepal, they are all funded by the US government. I showed you their funding. They were the ones that created this firestorm of opposition, news stories, video clips. This is what got it all going. And then the youth groups that the US was obviously connected to and backing took all of that and they organized these people in the streets. They had access to VPN. You could argue that a lot of people probably got their hands on VPN organically. Okay. But BitChat, no, I refuse to believe that they all just got it and were able to effectively use it right on the spot. And then also create the tactics, strategy, and maintain the logistics required to outmaneuver a nation state government, enabling them to overthrow it in just 5 days. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make, there's no logical explanation for it. There is no precedent for it. And as we know, the US has overthrown one government after the other in exactly this manner, using exactly the same tools, the same type of organizations, and there were US government-funded organizations involved directly in this political crisis. Why is the US interfering in Nepal? Well, we're talking about information space sovereignty and Nepal trying to achieve it. And of course, if Nepal achieves it, other nations are going to see them do it, and they're going to want to do it. So every time a nation tries to pass an NGO law, like Thailand here or Georgia, there will be these mass protests by US-backed groups to try to stop it. Nepal tries to pass laws to secure their information space, to achieve sovereignty over their information space. It was literally an army of US-funded organizations complaining about it and trying to stop it and trying to create anger over it to spark these protests. There was a single gateway proposed here in Thailand under the Thai military connected government before the US got their client regime back into power. And they had the NED funded groups that I've been exposing here for years, martial protests out into the street, forcing the government to abandon it. That is an established motive and pattern of action that we can attribute to the United States. We see US funded organizations involved in both Indonesia and Nepal. They were involved here in Thailand. They're involved there in Georgia, in the Caucasus region, right along Russia's southern border. Why else is the US interested in destabilizing Nepal? I showed you the map. It's right between India and China. So if you create a gigantic mess right on India and China's border, you're punishing both nations. China specifically, this was at the very end of last year, China-Nepal Railway to be a game changer, transformed Nepal from landlocked to land-linked, former envoy. Global Times, this is Chinese state media, and they're talking about the process of trying to get this railroad link completed, to get it built and completed to connect the people of Nepal with the rest of China and thus the rest of the world. It would transform Nepal. And the US, again, there is a motivation here. And there's also a precedent. Here in Thailand, there is a Thai-Chinese high-speed rail link being built right now. It's under construction. You can go visit the construction sites across the country where this is being built. And the United States tried to block it here too. They had this billionaire, Tanatan Juang Gruan Git. He traveled to the United States. He met with the State Department, USAID, all of these different media organizations. He also visited the Hyperloop test track in Nevada. And then he came back to Thailand. This was 2018. Thailand needs Hyperloop, not China-built high-speed rail, junta critic claims. And so this billionaire backed by the US tells Thailand, cancel. You're already building it, but cancel it. Tear it down. You don't need Chinese high-speed rail technology that safely moves billions of people every single year all across China and now across Laos, Thailand's neighbor to the north. You don't need that. Get the Hyperloop instead, which doesn't even really exist. It is science fiction. There is a rudimentary prototype of a prototype in the Nevada desert. Let's do that instead. And what he was basically saying is, don't develop your country at all. Stop working with China. And then during a press conference, this is what he said.
Well, we want to rebalance the game of power between big nations. I think over the past 5 years, we have been giving too much importance in dealing with China. We want to reduce that, and we want to rebalance our relationship toward Europe, toward Japan, toward the US more.
So essentially, don't work with China. We're working too closely with China. We need to pivot back to the US, Japan, and Europe, who have nothing to actually offer us in terms of development. But I'm backed by the US, and I want Thailand subordinated to the US. That is why they're backing me. Okay, so that's what was going on in Nepal. It's a combination of things. People are talking about who the interim prime minister is. It's just a 73-year-old grandmother. I'm not calling her that. Other people are calling her that. An interim government, even if she was elected, you know, they're saying she was elected on Discord by a tiny minority of the country's population, which is completely absurd. It's not even fake democracy. It's just absurd, and it's insulting. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if she has huge connections with the US or not. That is not the evidence you look for. You look at the organizations involved and if they're connected to the US. And I showed you all of the connections, overwhelming evidence of US involvement in this protest for the same exact reasons and built on the same template. We know the US has done this in other countries. An interim government, some person you cannot readily find a connection between her and the US, and you say, well, that solves it. It's not a US color revolution. I figured it out. Think about this. I'll give you an example of how ridiculous and even childish this method of analysis is. Vladimir Zelensky, a Russian-speaking Jewish comedian running for president of Ukraine. He's running on a platform of reconciling with Russia and ending the conflict in the east of Ukraine, solving that problem once and for all. This is why people vote for him. He gets into office, and does he do any of the things that he promised he was going to do? He had no connections to the US government at that time. No direct, obvious connections to the US government at the time. In fact, he presented an agenda that was opposed to the US objectives. They wanted to use Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia, and he wanted to stop this. As soon as he gets into power, he goes to the east and he talks to these literal Nazi militant units folded into the Ukrainian military. And they tell him straight to his face, he's the president of Ukraine. They tell him straight to his face, we're not going to make peace with Russia. And he was telling them, I'm the president. They didn't care. They've got the guns. They've got the support of the United States. Doesn't matter what Zelensky ever said. And today, what is Zelensky? Is the most obedient, enthusiastic supporter of the US agenda of using Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. And there you see a Russian-speaking Jewish comedian pinning awards onto the chest of literal self-proclaimed Nazi militants. So that's why it doesn't matter who you think the interim government is. Doesn't matter what power does this person, he or she, actually have versus the level of influence the US has established and maintains over the opposition. And now, because they've overthrown the government, the entire country itself. That is how you sort out reality. You have to follow the money. Follow the money, follow the guns, follow the real power. Not what you think ideally should be the way it works, but how it actually works. You have to face reality. There's another video, excellent video by Nuri, how the US achieved regime change in China-friendly Nepal. And he's talking all about this attempt by Nepal to establish its own independent information space, how the US was openly opposed to it, how the US spent years and millions of dollars building up the networks required to overthrow the government in Nepal and burn everything down and get people killed. Okay? That will be in the video description below. Please watch that video. Nuri has done excellent work on Nepal, and he's based in China, and he's done a lot of work on US interference in China itself, including personally having lived through the US-backed violence in Hong Kong. Now, I'm not done. I'm not done with organizations involved in the protests. There is another organization. I always bring this up because this is in Thailand also. There's the Legal Aid and Consultancy Center. This is based in Nepal. Who are we working with? It openly lists the US aid, okay? Microsoft, Asia Foundation, which is funded by the US government, Open Society Foundation. And what do we do? It's a nonprofit organization that aims to enhance women's and marginalized groups' access to gender-responsive justice in Nepal, provides a wide range of legal aid and support to people in accessing justice, blah, 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 exactly like Thai Lawyers for Human Rights, which is funded by the U.S. National Endowment for Democracy here in Thailand. The founder went to Washington to get an award from then the First Lady, whoever President Trump was married to at the time. They go to the U.S. Embassy here in Thailand. They're funded by the U.S. government, and they also receive U.S. government money to provide endless legal aid to all the agitators the U.S. is trying to use to politically capture Thailand. So that is the Thai Lawyers for Human Rights equivalent for Nepal. I just showed it to you, and I showed you the U.S. aid listed by name on their own website. And if you go to their social media, you take 5 minutes to save this image on your computer, and then you upload it to a translation service that will look at the image and then translate it into your language of choice. They will tell you that if you've been involved in these protests and you need legal aid, come contact us. We have endless money from the US government to give you a sense of impunity from burning your own country down because the US manipulated you into doing so. Now, again, I'm not saying that these kids weren't really angry, but who made them angry? And how did they all get angry all at the same time? And how did they all decide to go to the same places, outmaneuvering the police and military, to burn down all of these very, very large and expensive buildings, you know, talking about corruption and where'd our tax dollars go? They went up in smoke. You burned your own city to the ground. You did that. Not the government, you did that. They were really angry, I'm certain of it, but do they understand why they're angry? Do they understand who is behind this? Do they understand that the US has done this in many other countries? And all of this fighting and the bright, beautiful future they're imagining in their head while they're doing this, are they actually ever going to achieve that? And just like all across the Arab Spring, I don't doubt that any of those people, I don't think any of those people were like, I'm gonna burn my country down for the US. None of them thought that way. They were duped into doing it through social media. We see how social media manipulates millions and millions of people. Even in your country, wherever you are, you can see there is a division being created by social media in your country. You see the role it plays in politics. Misleading people, dividing and distracting people. Nobody is using it to marshal against the actual special interests who are actually leveraging social media to control people and to even overthrow countries. They are fighting with each other, and that is all by design. People do have human agency, but across a very limited bandwidth during their life. It is whatever they have the time and energy to invest time into understanding, they have agency regarding that. If they don't know who's leading the protest, who's funding it, what a color revolution is, the fact that the US has done this all over the place, if they don't understand that, then no, they have no agency in joining and participating in a protest. They don't know anything about it. They don't know who's behind it. They have no idea where it's going. Because if they did, they wouldn't have joined it in the first place. The Arab Spring would never have happened because all of those people would have said, the US is behind this. They burn countries down and destroy them. They do not build them up and give them bright futures. We're not going to participate in this. These leaders telling us to come out into the streets, they are connected to the US government, and we're not going to be involved in this. If we want to make change, we have to think of a constructive way to do it. And it doesn't entail burning our own country down, fighting with the police and military, getting people killed, overthrowing a government, creating a power vacuum the US can fill up with anyone it wants. Even if it's someone that's not even connected to the US now has the leverage to force that person to do whatever they want, just like they did with Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine. People need to start wising up, facing reality. I know how attractive it is to want to think everybody has infinite, unlimited human agency. We all know exactly what we're doing and why, but in reality, we don't. In reality, we don't. I remember as a kid in high school, even as a young US Marine of age, of voting age, I had no idea what was going on, had no idea what I was doing, had no idea why I was really voting for George Bush during the first and only presidential election I participated in. And it was only until later when I woke up that I realized I was manipulated. I was duped. I can admit it. You need to admit it. You need to wake up and face reality. Or the US is just going to take advantage of your ignorance, your arrogance, your sense of self-importance, And they're going to use that against you to destroy you and everything around you, as they have now just done in Nepal. Now, securing information space. I've been saying this over and over again for many years. In the 21st century, information space is a national security domain. It is as important as defending your land borders, your airspace, and your shores. Not defending your information space, allowing a foreign social media platform to control the flow of information inside your country is the same as just not just opening your land borders, but having US troops guard it and decide who can and cannot come through and why. It would be like allowing the United States to control your airspace like Qatar has done. And then you're surprised that Israeli warplanes unimpeded come and drop bombs in the middle of your cities and kill people. That is what it is like if you leave your information space unsecured. You need to pass strict NGO laws that stop the US from funding these organizations. You need to expose them, cut them off, and fully uproot them. You need to create your own indigenous social media platforms, work with countries like Russia and China that have already done it. They will help you do it. They will make money off of it. You will make money off of it. All the money Google and Facebook and X are taking out of your country through social media, you could be making that money and keeping it in your country. Create a pipeline so that young people interested in politics, media, policy making, international relations, they can go to school, learn from professors that are invested in the interests of your country, not having gone over to the West, studied, and now come back representing Western interests of your actual country. Create a pipeline that take these young people and connect them with careers in all of these respective fields so that you have a media, a legal system, an education system, a foreign ministry or Department of State that is actually pursuing your own country's best interests, not America's, at your own expense. All of these things need to be done to secure your information space and utilize it to reach your country's fullest potential. In a lot of ways, the way China is doing right now. And I have always said that Russia and China have done this. They have secured their information space. They already export weapons to help countries protect their other national security domains like land borders, airspace, shores. Why aren't they exporting the means to defend and protect and secure their partners' information space? It seems like there needs to be a very drastic, I would even say revolutionary paradigm shift in this regard. We're in the 21st century, but far too many nations are still thinking in a 20th century mindset, and it is costing them their country. Nepal is the latest victim. And again, when these protests start, identify the leaders, identify where the funding is coming from. It does not matter whether a protest is good or bad or who is involved. It still requires leadership and resources. It is coming from somewhere. Identify from where. I just showed you it's coming from the United States. Overwhelming evidence suggests that the vast majority of these groups involved were funded by the US, and they used the exact same template that has been used repeatedly, admittedly, from Serbia to the Arab world to Ukraine, and more recently Hong Kong and even Indonesia. People telling me about human agency, I will respond by saying it doesn't matter what you think you're out there protesting for. I asked them, they said they're upset about corruption. They didn't say anything about the US funding them. The vast majority of the people at these protests get duped into them. They don't know that it's US funded. They're not getting paid. They've been wrapped up in it. It's the whole point of controlling information spaces, to stir people up. They're really stirred up. It's just the intentions behind it are malicious. It doesn't matter what they think they're out there for. It only matters why they are actually out there. And if a US-backed movement, US-funded agenda, put them out into the street, that is why they're actually out there, even if they think it isn't. This is a form of marketing. We see the damage marketing does all around the world, how it convinces people to buy products they don't need, products that are unhealthy, even products that make you sick and can eventually kill you, like alcohol and cigarettes. And so it's the exact same process. As a matter of fact, that is admittedly so. And I've showed this article many times from 2004. U.S. campaign behind the turmoil in Kiev. Also not an organic, spontaneous protest. Completely engineered by the United States. And it even says, The campaign is an American creation, a sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing that in 4 countries in 4 years has been used to try to salvage rigged elections and topple unsavory regimes. And that these are all just euphemisms for elections that didn't turn out the way the US wanted and governments that don't listen to us. That's what that actually means. And they talk about it, how it's all funded by the US government through the National Endowment for Democracy. But the main key is marketing. It's marketing. It's branding. It is appealing to people emotionally, not rationally, not objectively. That's what's going on here, and you have to understand that. So I hope that people start catching on. It's very discouraging to see it in 2025, the US having done this so often. Admittedly, they admit that this is what they do. And the template is so obvious to spot. And then you can find the actual names of the organizations and you can see on their own website admitted US funding, and people are still saying, I don't see any evidence of it. I'm not convinced. Just because the US is funding them doesn't mean that they don't have their own agenda. I mean, yes, it does. History has proven it. There's not even one example of a nation where groups funded by the US government did this and the country turned out better. Unless, of course, the people in that country overturned whatever it was that they did. I'm going to leave it there. This has already been an excruciatingly long video. I felt the need to bury these people alive in the evidence. Don't expect them to change their mind, but I hope I convince other people who have open minds what just took place in Nepal, and to be aware that this is a ever-present danger for other nations all around the globe. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. Everything in the video description is there, including all of these links that I just referenced, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize any of my social media platforms, and I am not funded by any government grants or allotments. I depend on the support from my audience. You can support my work through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon to everyone who has been, whether it's a one-time donation or donations month to month. Or even if you have no resources to spare, please don't apologize. Just sharing my work with others and getting this information out to other people is good enough. That also helps. That is also essential. All of that is what makes this work possible. So thank all of you. And as always, thank you for watching.